Hi, this is Victoria.ford from Perago on Remote Control Season 2.
Hi, Victoria. Thanks for joining us on Season 2 of Remote Control. It's great to have you on.
Hi, thank you very much for asking me.
So, before we dive into our conversation, which is going to be around business change and transformation, it'd be great to hear a bit more about you and also the work that Perago do as well.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. So I am I don't know, how do I describe myself? A specialist in comms, business change, transformation. I've been working in the change space for probably about 10, 15 years now. Initially started off doing business change actually for a government organisation, and then got involved in comms. So I've got quite a weird career path into being a head of communications, which I was in the civil service for a while, but because I was so interested in the way that people respond to change, what organisations need to do to support people through change, and also the role then that internal communications has to play in that. So that's my background space. I left the civil service some sort of 4 or 5 years ago and set up Perago with some colleagues. We're a small an SME based in South Wales. We're based in Swansea. We're all from Swansea. And we work primarily across organisations sort of doing public service delivery in Wales, but we do go wider as well. And we work with people on their transformation around the organisation, digital, and my role, particularly in that, looks at the people, business change and communication side of it.
Oh, wow. So, it's really quite a broad piece that Perago look at because change is everywhere, isn't it, for business, especially at the moment?
Absolutely, and I think we talk to people. If we say we do digital transformation, which is kind of what we do, people quite often think that means technology. And whilst as a team we do have a fair bit of background and understanding of technology. I can't say that technological change. Actually, it's far more than just technology. For me, it's more about people and the way that people respond to change, about how you use digital tools to provide better services for your customers, whatever that service is you provide. So we very much focus on the whole organisation, on what we call sort of user-centred service design. So designing the services that you deliver around the needs of your users. So really understanding what people need to do to be able to interact as smoothly as possible with an organisation.
Yeah, that makes total sense and echoes some of the other conversations specific to internal comms that I've had on uh, season 1 of this podcast, where it was actually one of the questions I would ask would be kind of what tech and what tools would you recommend? And most of the answers always came back with, I don't really start with the tech and the tools.
Absolutely.
It's all
Yeah.
about the message. It's kind of what is the takeaway that's needed at the end, or the change that is needed to happen, and then almost work backwards from that, and how are people kind of set up to receive it. So it might be great to invest in this brand new technology, but if the workforce doesn't have access to work mobile phones, or
Mm.
they're told that their mobile phones must stay in the desk during the 9 to 5, suddenly having an SMS tool or push notification tools, pretty useless at the end of the
Not going to
day.
work.
Yeah. So that was,
And
yeah,
it,
so
and
echoes.
it is interesting because, I think it's great when people are seeing new technology working and, it blows our minds, all of us, doesn't it, what it can actually do for you. So people thinking about that in a work context and how it can make the way that we do things better is great. But actually, if you jump to that, or, I've seen this whizzy thing in this organization, can we have one too, please? Chances are you'll end up with something that no one uses.
Yes. Yeah. I think I think everyone can think of at least one tool in their current business that sounds and looks good, but has not really been used that much.
Yeah.
That actually kind of reminds me of a question, that because we're here and kind of want to talk a little bit about internal comms, change, and remote working. When I first started the Remote Control podcast, it was kind of based around this, what seemed like an outlandish claim, that 50% of workers would be remote in 2020. Now,
Can you imagine?
God, could you imagine such a thing? I don't think that the people who did the research quite foresaw what was going to happen this year. I don't think anyone has
No.
done, certainly in a work environment as well. And so I guess when we're talking about working remotely, there's a lot that gets talked about in terms of the in terms of the tools. But I think maybe this year more than ever, it's become really apparent to everyone that it's kind of the culture of the business and its leaders that are so vital for remote working to work for employees, and also to keep that business performance going. It can't just be suddenly that, okay, everyone has to work remotely, and yet it's great that we've got Teams or we use Zoom for one-to-one calls. That's just not going to cut it. It needs to be that culture of kind of keeping in touch with people, being self-motivated at times as well. It's like a lot more than just a tech, and it just really mirrored what we'd already started talking about.
And I think that's absolutely right. So prior to the pandemic, working with organisations, most of the organisations I've been working with and our company have been working with actually were pretty well set up from a technology perspective for remote working, maybe not to the extent that we've now found ourselves in, but actually people could work remotely if they choose to, or if their job allowed them to do. What tended to be missing is that cultural piece that you've just mentioned, the moving away from that idea of presenteeism, that unless you're sat at a desk somewhere, you're not working. Don't get me wrong, it's not like that everywhere. Lots of places there was a great culture, and people were able to work when they wanted to. But it was always that sense of actually you've always got to be on, always there, in one way or another. And that was the kind of cultural stuff that people were finding very challenging, to be able to move people into a truly flexible way of remote working.
Yeah, totally. I think even if I think to how I've been working, and Stringo, who I work for, were flexible in the first place. I would work from home 1 or 2 days a week anyway. I was kind of structured around childcare, so that flexible working was already there. But it was kind of a bit of a change I needed to make, rather than the company, in terms of just because I could look at my emails on my phone didn't mean that I had to, or that I could get instant message on my phone. It's kind of like, actually, people are going through a lot in the summer, and yes, there's a message there. It can wait until, I finished my morning shift with the kids during lockdown, when, schools and nurseries weren't open as usual. And it's just kind of working that out for myself is perhaps something that kind of took me a little bit by surprise. And I don't know how many other companies kind of really almost force their employees to take a step back from working, which is very odd sentence to say.
And I think it was a bit of a shock. Well, a lot of it was a shock to all of us, wasn't it? But actually, we should think we've had years and years of culture ingrained in us about, during working hours, we work, whether that's 9 till 5, 12 till 10, whatever your working hours happen to be. Yeah. That's when you were very much in work mode, that you were expected to be available, that you were expected to be responsive, and for a lot of people, expected to be physically present in an office space of some description. And I think that obviously all got thrown right up in the air. And no matter what organizations would do to support you technology-wise to work within that, as you say, getting your own head personally around what that meant for you and allowing yourself to behave differently has been a massive challenge. And I don't think a lot of people still, I'm not great at it. There's lots I could be doing better about switching off. My kids are older. My son's 15, but he was having a go at me yesterday because I was checking messages on my phone when he was trying to ask me a question at 8 o'clock in the evening. Now, we're not great at switching off, and we need to make more of an effort to do so. One of the things that I saw right at the start of lockdown with one client we were working with was a really good message shift that happened quite early on, because they recognised this. And one of the things that they started asking us to think about was how we could get the message across to the organisation that actually right now work didn't come first, and that was okay. And it was okay to say that and to accept it. And they introduced a slogan that said self, family, work in that order. So we started using that throughout the organisation, and I'm not sure, if I'm honest, who came up with it. It was probably someone who was a bit of a Gareth Bale fan, because I don't know if you're a football fan, but his line when he was in Madrid about, golf, Wales, Madrid in that order, so it seemed to ring a bell on that. But it actually became quite a strong message that we've then found people in the organisation repeating back at us. When you realise that these things have worked, because people are telling you that that's what you need to do as well. And I thought that was quite a positive and quite a brave step for the organisation to come out so openly and say, do you know what, right now, the most important thing is looking after yourself and your family, because if you can get that right, the work will come anyway.
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful and quite emboldening or empowering message, that to get that from your, whether it's your line manager, or if it is kind of corporate communications as a whole. It feels like that would kind of really put your mind at ease and hopefully help you strike a kind of a good balance during the time when it was, almost impossible to work out what that balance was, really.
And it works in the organisation's benefit as well, doesn't it? You think about the emotional contract that you have with your workplace
Yeah.
and your work. If you feel that somebody's supporting you when you need it, you're prepared to support them when they need it as well. It's that two-way piece that works really nicely.
Yeah, and you can imagine people coming to, the third piece of that, looking after themselves, sort of making sure the family's right, and then it's the work. You can imagine them being in um, maybe more energized or kind of positive mood, and to deliver or be more productive within that time. And I'm not saying
Exactly.
that's why the company said it like that, but you can just imagine that those unintended benefits of
Absolutely,
making
it
sure
works. Yeah,
everyone's
it,
okay.
it works in both ways, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
that way of getting it to know that someone cares, actually. And it's one of the things that I think has really shifted in the language of organisations over the last 6 months. People are actually talking about some of the kind of more emotional elements
Hmm.
of people in work that perhaps weren't talked about before. So it's okay to say you care, and it's okay to say that you're struggling, and it's okay to give people space. And I think it's been really beneficial that we're not just giving permission to people to do things, but actually recognizing these challenges front on.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you mentioned kind of there being a change in attitude towards kind of the emotional, the personal side of things, and that really reflects what Emma Tucker from Temenos said in the last episode of this podcast, where um, her company Temenos had changed messaging from being fairly kind of business focused, and
Mm,
they were always traditionally kind of a kind of high growth company, lots of product launches, kind of awards and accolades, and that was the kind of communication that, this is the way forward, this is where we're going. And it, she kind of mentioned it quite quickly, but organically changed during this year to a kind of a personal approach, and kind of
yeah.
focusing on the people of Temenos. And she said that's even going to extend into the external communications, and instead of, case studies, was what she said, case studies would usually focus on purely on the results and kind of what technology was implemented, whereas they're going to kind of change to be about how what impact it had on the people at their clients, at the banks, how it made them feel, how it changed their days. And I thought that was really interesting and totally mirrors exactly what you've just said today.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting in months, years to come how that shifts, not not just individuals within organizations, but work cultures as a whole.
Yeah, you think it'd be pretty unrecognizable even next year with the amount of change that's had to happen in 2020. And unfortunately, you've seen kind of businesses kind of having to make cuts, and you just hope that it's the culture side of thing kind of comes along and doesn't get ignored and cut at the same time as some of the
Yeah.
resources, and that the people that are still working there and kind of moving into different roles are kind of able to get that support, and really feel, a connection to the company, if and when we get out of this kind of pandemic crisis mode.
Yeah, whenever that might be.
Yeah, I just can't put a date on that one just yet, doesn't
No,
seem like.
no.
So you mentioned there that one of your clients quite quickly at the start of lockdown kind of, shifted their message to the self family work in that order. I was just wondering if there were any other immediate changes that you saw kind of your clients, needing help with.
Yeah, well, I think, and I'm sure internal comms practitioners across the country will recognise this. There was that obvious need, and that people had for more information, and changing information at the pace that things were moving, particularly March, April, May time. Although I'm not sure it's calmed down that much now, but being able to ensure that people had what they needed to make the decisions that they needed to make for themselves personally and to be able to work. at a time that worked for them and that was, in a timely way when that information was becoming available, but also in a way that worked for them as well. One chief executive I was working with said to me at the very outset, we need your help more than ever in the internal comm space, and actually I want people to feel more connected than they ever have before in this organisation, even though we're all now working remotely. And I thought that was a really I don't quite the word, but quite a forward-thinking approach to it. So I felt personally quite, do you know what? I want to work with this person who feels that is how things should be, because they're absolutely right. This is an opportunity for us to ensure that everyone can find a way to be connected when we could possibly be feeling the most disconnected from work than we ever had. So the amount of internal comms and the amount of messaging and the need for new channels just sort of went to the roof with most of the clients that we work with. And that was probably the most immediate response and need that we saw to all of this.
Yeah, and I think the chief exec's kind of focus on getting those connections there, you can imagine, you can see how that would play such a big part in someone's life when the other connections that you know, if you think about maybe at the start of the year where you come to work and you'd make the connections, you'd do the job, but you'd also then have the opportunity to see family, see friends at the weekend or after work, and suddenly those connections were being really limited as well. So the fact that the business wanted to kind of almost step up and make colleagues even more connected, you could really see how that could really foster kind of a sense of community at a time when those kind of connections were in danger of being broken at work and in people's personal lives.
And people are in different situations, aren't they? If people are living on their own, that becomes obviously even more difficult. But actually, even people living with families, and you mentioned small children, that's really tough. When you're trying to manage your family as well as work, and finding different ways to stay connected in those different circumstances becomes really important. Even on a really sort of small level, one team that I was working with, we decided straight up that I'd be available along with one of the other colleagues there for at least half an hour every day at 10 o'clock on a particular channel, and anyone could drop in at any time. And actually, there's always somebody. It's quite a small team, but somebody always drops in. And sometimes it is literally just to say, hi, you okay? With a cup of coffee and have that chat. Because I just didn't want anyone to feel that they were completely isolated or on their own. And, as in a work environment, you can't solve all of those problems, but if you can just do that little bit, that might make it that little bit easier for somebody. And actually, for me personally, I thrive on talking to people anyway, so it was great for me because it meant that I kept having that connection that my kind of way of working needs.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good initiative, and I think having those kind of intentional points of contact, or the opportunity to have those contacts is really important. And I know if I think about how I've interacted with my team, it changed from having a weekly update where we chat about everything to do with marketing, and actually in kind of this remote world, that just didn't really feel right to have a meeting on a Monday morning or Tuesday afternoon to talk about that, and then you'd potentially kind of get lost in your work. You work in different patterns. I was working different hours to so that me and my wife and could look after kids and carry on working at the same time. And before you know it, you're back to Monday or Tuesday and having that meeting. And that's just crazy not to have that interaction with a small team. So we broke it down to have individual meetings about kind of key topics and points where you'd be mainly focused on just that one thing, and that suddenly felt a lot better. Suddenly felt that you were kind of seeing more we were seeing more people more of the time on different days, and it did feel like there was a bit more energy in the work as opposed to having to do a massive download of what's been going on in the week, and just that little tweak felt good.
And I think we've all had to make those tweaks, haven't we? Because actually we do all, I don't know about you, but I miss those kind of, stood in the coffee queue having a quick chat with someone you haven't seen for a while, or just being able to sort of swivel your chair around and shout across the room to somebody about something they're doing, or seeing somebody as you get out the car in the morning and having a quick chat about how they spent their evening last night. Yeah, it's those small interactions that, for me personally, I find the most challenging not to have. You can say you can make time for formal conversations, but how do you replace those sort of smaller interactions as being quite a challenge?
Yes, yeah, totally agree. And it's just actually reminded me that this time last year we were well into the midst of the kind of company bake-off tournament, and so we're sampling all kinds of treats, and that's just that's been laid to waste this year,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's hard for people. It's hard for all of us, isn't it? But it's not. I personally, I don't think that you can just replicate those in any way. But there are things you can do just to try and make it a little bit better. And it's some of that personal interaction stuff becomes the important replacement, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. So you mentioned that kind of immediately when kind of lockdown was introduced, that businesses, people were kind of racing towards the communication, making sure people had the right kind of communication, they could get to the right places, maybe new channels were being opened up. Is that kind of the same now? Are those the same challenges that people are facing or asking you questions around, or has it changed slightly?
No, there's been a definite shift, and I think that shift sort of came somewhere in the summer, maybe. It's hard to put a finger on it, isn't it? But
Yes.
someone said to me once, "So, I'm not working remotely. I'm working from home during a global pandemic." And it's a very different thing. And that's what those first 3 months very much felt like. This wasn't a normal situation in any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't just I've gone from working 2 days a week from home to 5. This was trying to just get by.
Yeah.
But as people sort of started, came out of lockdown a bit, and I know we're in local lockdowns again, and people have got similar challenges, but it opened up more opportunity for people to start thinking about what comes next. And I think even though we've got challenges now, that thinking about what's next has started to come into the way organizations are talking and planning, and really thinking about what that workplace of the future looks like. I know there are some people who hate working from home or are unable to do so or find it very difficult, and can't wait to get back to some kind of whether it's an office environment or something else. There's some people who love working from home and might want to do 5 days a week from home, but most people seem to be somewhere in the middle. And I think that's where the real shift is going to be. So organizations are starting to ask that question around, well, actually, what does the future workplace look like? Not necessarily office, that workplace. And what does it need to be? And what are we going to want from it? So it feels like we've moved away from having a desk where you come in and you sit from 9 till 5 to do a job because you have to be sat at a desk, to actually, I need to go into a workplace because I have a specific task that I need to do or something I have to achieve that's better done in that way. And I think that question around what does a workplace look like, and what do we need to give people in the future that allows them to have the flexibility to sort of be the best they can be, to actually respond to what people need to work well, rather than what an organisation felt had to happen just because it's what we'd done for years and years. So I think that question around future workplaces is a really important one. And I think a lot of senior leaders, or I hope a lot of senior leaders, are getting to that realization that presenteeism isn't the answer. It's about actually supporting and providing the environment that people need to work effectively, and all of that, and it's like this hasn't changed at all. Actually, it's about trust. It's about having trust in your colleagues, in each other, in leadership trusting in the organization that people will do what's best, but how does the organization support them in that? And then within that, what's the role of change and communications in making that happen?
And so when we're talking about workplaces and it's potentially, my mind went straight to kind of, okay, well, what's best for me to do my work? Uh,
Yeah.
um, but then that kind of potentially negates what we were also talking about with the less formal kind of communications that happen in a shared space. And I just wonder around businesses and leaders that are planning or starting to think about this change from office to workplace to a hybrid between people being in and people working from different spaces, and how teams kind of maybe need to manage the fact that it would be ideal, or it might be good for more than one person to be in a location at the same time, and kind of how that will be different from how people are used to just working and doing what's best for them right now. It's kind of maybe going to be a bit of friction there between the individual and the company and the team again, potentially.
Um, this goes back to really understanding what people need. And I say what people need rather than what the organization needs, because I think if you can understand what your people need, you can start building an organization around that
Mm-hmm.
that will help you meet your needs better. So understanding what's needed for people to do their job effectively, and that some of that will be, whether it's I need to go into a collaborative space once a week to bounce ideas around about a new project, or right down to, well, actually, I need to be face to face with the client, or it could be I just need a quiet space where I can go and work. And we need to understand what all those things are and look at the most effective way to provide that. Now, it's not going to tick every box, but then the workplaces we had before didn't tick every box for
Yeah.
everybody. And I think, when it comes to the role of internal comms in that, it's about getting people involved and exploring what some of those things could look like, and testing them and getting feedback, and really having that two-way dialogue that an organization can really get involved and understand what's going to work now in this very kind of short to medium term piece, and more longer term on that. And that'll be a whole mix of things. And I think one of the things that I've seen so much over the last sort of 6-9 months is people trying new things. They don't
Mm-hmm.
always work, and that's fine, but actually keep bouncing new stuff out there and see if actually that's something that can help fill a gap or not. Whether that's some of the things that you might already be familiar with, like internal blogs, or web chats, or webinars, getting leaders up in front of the organization in different ways, or through to new online tools, whether you something like Miro for doing whiteboards. Someone said to me the other day, we've reached a point where we need to start thinking about how we do things differently. It's not about, I need to wait to go back to the office to support colleagues.
Yeah.
We need to be able to learn to do it differently now. I can't wait to go back to the office to performance manage someone. We need to learn to do it differently now. And I think that realization that this is a longer term piece that is going to shift the way we do things is allowing people to actually be more creative and think about things differently. So what are all those answers? I don't know what they all are, but actually the fact that people are exploring different things and trying them out and recognizing that it has to be different is a massive step.
Yeah, certainly feels like it's everyone's recognized that what was happening before was kind of maybe ticking along, and if we think back to the first part of this, where I talked about, research had said that more people would be working remotely, and then the pandemic happened, but there was this shift that was happening anyway. So getting people kind of used to the idea was a little bit drastic this year, I suppose, but it
Well,
was
it's one way of doing it, but not one we choose.
no, I don't think it was
but
quite.
but actually saying that, there's an opportunity here. We never thought that we'd be in a place where that change bit happened so quickly. Now, that doesn't mean it's been easy for people, and it doesn't mean, a few people said to me, it's been great because, in 6 months we've managed to get further than we would have done in our change program in 6 years. Well, yes, and that's good, and we need to find the positives in that, but actually people will still have found it hard. Change is still hard for people, and we need to recognize that and support them. But there's some really good stuff that's coming out of this. I was chatting to someone the other day about how this situation has been a great leveler. So, for example, in Wales, where I work and live, geographically, north to south Wales doesn't look very far, but to drive it takes forever. It's the most beautiful drive. If you've ever done it, you'll know. If you don't, you should when you can, because it's magnificent scenery, but it takes a long time. So when you've got an organisation that you've got some people working in North Wales, some in West Wales, some in South Wales, and you've always got the people in one office with 1 or 2 people dialing in, that's actually not a very good balance. that geographical thing. Everyone on Zoom together, everyone on Teams together, or whatever platform you're using, suddenly you're all in the same place. So it's a real leveler from a geographical seniority, positioning in an organization where everyone can start to feel more equal. And people starting to feel like that allows people to contribute more and feel more involved and part of an organization. So for me, it's how do we take those really good things that have come out of this and adopt them in whatever our new world is going to look like?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and especially on the kind of the leveler point of view, from when you mentioned seniority, and I can think back to kind of meetings that I've had that people I know that I've had with their kind of seniors, their maybe line managers or kind of or higher, and you see what their spare room looks like or their kitchen looks like, and you kind of notice the pictures on the wall, and you do kind of get more personality from someone that you perhaps they might subconsciously kind of put up a bit of a work barrier in the office that kind of does fall
Yeah,
away a little bit.
but there's also the other side of that. I do know that some people really struggle with that. Actually, they like their personal space, and they don't like sharing that bit of their world. You get it. Some people, for example, that just don't like having their videos turned on
Yeah.
in video calls. And actually, even me personally, at first I was like, oh, that's a bit rude, isn't it? I can't see their face, can't see what they're up to, because I like seeing people, I like chatting to people. But actually, if that was making somebody uncomfortable in their workplace, because that was now their workplace as well as their home, then
Yeah.
actually that's fine. And I just think we need to take the positives. So where it does allow you to engage with people and feel part and understand people, brilliant, but actually cut people some slack as well about understanding what works for different people and making sure that organizations can reflect all of that. Again, it's going back to that bit about the user need and really understanding what people need to be effective.
Yeah, and I guess like you say, it's never going to be a blanket one size fits all approach that kind of gets the best
Yeah.
performance or best result.
And you'll have seen the debates on Twitter, as I'm sure we all have. Someone says, I love this working from home, and then he gets a million people saying, no, I hate it, and blah, 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 and then the vice versa is happening. And it just shows that, we're different. People are different. We respond differently to different situations at different times, depending on who we are and what's going on around us. And that's something that organizations are really going to have to think about. And not just think, but actually it's a massive opportunity to create a different way of working that actually gets more out of people, because we're treating them as individuals and allowing them to work in a way that actually works for them as well as the organization.
Yeah, and I think on that note, for internal comms, that I guess my mind is thinking that presents kind of a whole new challenge. The fact that there is going to be potentially more um, disparate number of channels that people want to use, or kind of communication is slightly different for different people, and it's making sure that the maybe not skills, because communication is always going to be there, but maybe it is
Yeah.
starting to think about the tools, because we've looked at the user needs, and it's understanding kind of how people want to receive information, how to best engage with it, and then seeing how that can be delivered and which messages need to go into that. It's kind of a potentially something a little bit new or a little bit different to those initial stages of, oh my gosh, we've got so much information we need to get out there. There's so much
Yeah.
change going on. It's just like,
Yeah, and when I've worked with organisations on this, I've actually encouraged them to put a little bit of structure around it. So actually put a bit of a framework in place around how you're going to communicate with who and how often. That may seem really basic, but when you're in the midst of this kind of change, it's hard, it's very easy to forget that and suddenly just use every channel you can think of, fire it out to everybody and hope for the best. Actually, if you take that little bit of time to step back and plan and think about what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to reach, and how do you open up those two-way channels of communication. And that might result in you saying, do you know what, we need to put this message out via 6 channels. But if you're doing that knowingly, because you've understood your audience and know what's needed to help support them, then that's a good thing. It's when you end up doing it ad hoc all over the place that can be challenging for the people receiving the information as well. I
yeah.
don't know about you, but I seem to have on my phone at the moment, I've got Slack, I've got Twitter, I've got WhatsApp, I've got Teams, I've got email, and I forget which channel I'm having a conversation on with whom sometimes. I was like, I know someone sent me a message, I can't even find it anymore. But
Yeah,
I'm trying them all out.
yeah. I've got that situation, but it's actually with my daughter's school. She just started school, and there's at least 3 or 4 different kind of apps or
Yeah.
parent mail kind of that are getting used, and it's really confusing as to which one goes where. And yeah, I get some, my wife
Lost
gets
in that.
some, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like, oh, did you see that one? I was like, no, didn't see that one. So yes, I can totally
It
see how
is.
that can
And,
happen.
part of that is, these organizations are responding really quickly to this stuff, and they're trying to put new channels in place, and they haven't worked out what the best one is to reach people. And I cut people some slack on that. We're all trying to muddle our way through it.
Oh
But
yeah.
as a user, you're right, trying to find the right channel. But hey, when my kids were starting school, they had no electronic channels. So, count yourself lucky.
Yeah, crumpled piece of paper in the backpack.
Yeah, that's about it.
At the end of the day.
Although there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, always, just about always managed to get home, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So, so this podcast is called Remote Control. So I couldn't really do it without asking for telly recommendations. So, what are you watching, and anything that you would recommend?
Oh, I'm gonna show myself up as being so far behind in this one. So what we're watching at the moment, which my 15-year-old son got us watching because he thinks it's hysterical, is Friday Night Dinner. Don't know if you've seen it.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think it was on some mainstream channel at some point, but it's on Netflix at the moment. And I have to say, it makes me chuckle. I'm not a laugh out loud person with television, but it makes me chuckle, not least because episode by episode, I'm just starting to think that my husband and myself are turning into those parents in that. I think we have become them, and I don't know quite how that happened, and it makes it even more cringeworthy.
Yeah, no, that's funny. That is kind of a recommendation from your son, but suddenly you're seeing yourself in that.
I know, it's horrible.
Oh, that's good. No, I've seen a few of those, but not all of them. But actually, Jennifer Sproul from the Institute of
Yeah.
Internal Comms
Yeah.
mentioned that as one of her recommendations too. So yeah,
I do.
maybe.
I love it. And they're only for people like me who can't concentrate on television very long. They're only half-an-hour episodes. I can't be doing with these 2-hour episodes at a time, things that you need to binge watch. So half an hour in there, have a good laugh, say to yourself, oh my goodness, I've turned into that person, and then on to the next thing.
That sounds good. It sounds like a good bit of light relief at the end of
Exactly.
very busy days.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Victoria. It's been like an amazing conversation and could kind of carry on for a lot longer, but I think my computer's about to blow up. It's whirring away.
Yeah, well, I've been really enjoyed talking to you. So again, thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, no problem. Is there anywhere that you want to send our listeners to, or point in direction for any more information, either to connect with you or to find out more information what we've been talking about?
Well, actually, an opportunity to link people into one thing. For comms professionals out there, particularly right now, if you're not already following or haven't picked up on Comms Unplugged, I would really advise you to go and have a look. It's kind of a voluntary organisation, I suppose, of comms professionals in the public sector who've got together to really support comms professionals with their well-being, and really focusing on how you unplug from this mad world that we're in to look after yourself for a little bit. And there's some great stuff in there. They're a great community of people, share some really good stuff, and we really do all need to look after ourselves right now.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'll make sure I include a link to that in the episode notes, so that will go out to wherever anyone listens to the podcast. There'll be kind of a link to that in there.
Fab, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, yeah, thank you. Thanks again. It's been really great chatting.
Thanks, Jack.
Remote Control, an internal comms podcast by Stream Go.